Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I would like to begin today's webinar with a quick message to everyone in our community and beyond whose life, family, or friends may have been impacted by Hurricane Helene and/or Hurricane Milton, which is ongoing at the moment. We just want you to know that we're thinking of you and we are hoping for the best. And thank you for joining today's ADHD Experts presentation, which is titled, Is RSD Poisoning Your Relationship? How to Reduce Shame and Build Stronger Connections. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Sharon Saline. Dr. Saline is a clinical psychologist, consultant, international speaker, and award-winning author. She specializes in working with children, teens, emerging adults, and families touched by ADHD, anxiety, learning differences, and more. Her unique perspective as a sibling in an ADHD home and decades of experience guide her in moving families and adults toward effective communication and closer connection. In today's webinar, we will discuss how to cultivate a better relationship when rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, stands in the way. RSD describes intense feelings related to real or perceived rejection. People experiencing RSD may lash out or pull away, no matter how strongly they actually want to connect. These severe feelings can lead to depression and self-isolation. So in today's conversation, Dr. Saline will address RSD in couples specifically. She'll offer concrete strategies for making repairs, creating effective bids for connection, using collaboration for disagreements, and improving relational empathy. We would love to begin today's webinar by asking two poll questions to our live audience. What tends to trigger your RSD in relationships? And what challenges do you encounter with regard to your partner's RSD? So please answer the question or questions that are most relevant to you. And for answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, you can click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. Also, printing today begins today on the winter issue of ADDitude magazine, which includes rich features on neurodivergence at work, ADHD and autism in women, outsmarting procrastination, and much more. To get the issue yourself, visit additudemag.com/subscribe and click the magazine tab, or you can click the magazine tab on your screen to learn more. And finally, the sponsor for today's webinar is Play Attention. Are your relationships being impacted by ADHD and rejection-sensitive dysphoria? Play Attention can help. Play Attention, inspired by NASA technology and backed by Tufts University research, is designed to strengthen executive function, helping you manage these emotional complexities. Click the link on screen to take Play Attention's ADHD test, or schedule a consultation to discover how Play Attention can support you in creating more balanced and harmonious interactions. Call 828-676-2240 or visit www.playattention.com to learn more. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. Okay, without any further ado, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Saline. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading us in this discussion about RSD in couples.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that lovely introduction. And I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm also sending out my wishes for health and safety to all of those who are affected by Hurricane Helene or the incoming Hurricane Milton. I thought we would start off by talking about some strengths of couples living with ADHD. So we see spontaneity, passion, creativity, humor, problem-solving skills, resilience, commitment, and tenacity. But we also see challenges. right? And these challenges have to do with executive functioning skills, such as impulse control, emotional regulation, working memory, and metacognition, which all contribute and are affected by rejection-sensitive dysphoria. I will be saying RSD instead of rejection-sensitive dysphoria because it is a mouthful. We see higher rates of social anxiety among people with ADHD at about 30%, which is much higher than we see in the general population. Of course, biology and genetics can add to reactivity and perceived rejection, as well as historic, social, familial, educational trauma, combined with racism, homophobia, and other biases, which intensify sensitivities. Several studies have shown that adults diagnosed with ADHD and their spouses have had more unfavorable patterns in their marriages with regard to the level of conflict, marital adjustment, conflict resolution styles, and reciprocal evaluations when compared to a comparison group. So what does all that mean? That spouses of individuals with ADHD tend to report lower levels of intimacy and lower levels of marital satisfaction compared to spouses of individuals without ADHD, and that that there is a relationship between the ADHD and marital satisfaction. ADHD, when it's not recognized or managed or treated properly, can contribute to the termination of marriages. We're trying to really help couples who are living with ADHD both identify their strengths as a couple, but also as individuals. Because when you're in a partnership relationship, there's each individual, but there's also the relationship itself, which is the third entity. I do want to say something about love languages, and I know some people have different views about this, but love languages, words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, gift giving, and physical touch vary from person to person and also within a couple. And so it's helpful for us when you're living in a couple to identify what are your love languages and for your partner to do the same, and then to figure out how you want to address those together. Next slide, please. Now, we cannot talk about RSD without zooming out to look at social anxiety in general. Social anxiety, RSD, perfectionism, and imposter syndrome all share a core sense of deficiency, a belief that you're not enough, that you can easily fail or be excluded because of being different. Maybe you're neurodivergent and you believe you don't deserve accolades, or you've had years of receiving criticism or experiencing judgment. And these basically fall into this stew of developing a core sense of deficiency. Social anxiety, in particular, is an intense fear in advance of an event or a situation, which could be embarrassing, where you're expecting some type of humiliation of some kind. Studies have found that an estimated 12% of all adults experience social anxiety at some times in their life, and it's one of the most common anxiety diagnoses. That 12% is quite different from the 30% that we see with people with ADHD. RSD falls under the umbrella of social anxiety because it takes these worries to the next level. It occurs in response to real or perceived rejection or criticism. Unlike social anxiety, which is a diagnostic category, social anxiety is a syndrome that was named by Dr. William Dodson after years of observing traits and behaviors in his patients with ADHD. And I know that Dr. Dodson has done a number of webinars and articles for ADDitude, so please check them out. Perfectionism acts as an inefficient coping mechanism for managing anxiety related to disappointment, yours or someone else's, insecurity or embarrassment. Perfectionism is directly related to a need for approval. And imposter syndrome reflects feeling like a fraud or a phony. It's directly related to perfectionism, which is, of course, related to RSD and social anxiety. So you can see how we're in the mix here, because for imposter syndrome, you're not perfect. You believe you're not perfect, but you can never achieve perfection. And so you're fundamentally flawed. So these are all domains of your inner ogre. Some people say inner critic or inner gremlin, but I say ogre, which is paired with your inner champion. Next slide, please. Rejection sensitivity dysphoria, causes extreme emotional pain because people believe that they've done something that's a serious, unfixable mistake, and other people will pull back their love, support, or respect. And it causes this intense pain even when no actual rejection has occurred, but the rejection is imagined or believed by the person. People with RSD also have sensory sensitivities. You can be wired to feel things more intensely and replay unpleasant interpersonal actions over and over. It's especially tough for these folks to recover from an unkind word or an action. And part of the reason is because at some level, they believe they deserve them. And they live in this one-down position, which intensifies their RSD and exacerbates their shame. People with RSD can experience intense mood shifts and mood changes that come from clear triggers versus the mood cycling we see with bipolar disorder, which isn't related to a specific trigger. People with RSD often struggle with emotional regulation, working memory, and metacognition, what I call self-evaluation, that self-awareness, being able to obtain perspective. In relationships marked by RSD, partners want their partner, so people want their partner to meet them where they are, to join with them in a kind of twinning experience. For those of you who understand self-psychology, it comes out of that. So it's not enough for someone to offer you a hug. They have to meet you where you are. They have to acknowledge the pain that you're in. They almost need to feel some of that pain so that you don't feel alone. RSD is the product of being criticized and judged negatively for who you are and made not to feel good enough because maybe you're too much. This can be the result of the trauma of being neurodivergent in a world designed for neurotypical brains. Now, there are two types of RSD. Internalized, negative feelings and strong reactions are directed to and stay inside of a person, and they are often expressed in heightened anxiety or panic. Externalized RSD are negative feelings and strong reactions that are directed outwardly towards others, and these can be seen in aggressive behaviors or outbursts. Next slide, please. So what are some characteristics of RSD? Often intense anticipatory anxiety and negative expectations about possible rejection. People with RSD see themselves as failures when they disappoint others. They have trouble perceiving responses from others neutrally and then often overreact to the perceived injury or threat, quickly dropping into shame, feeling humiliated or embarrassed, whether or not their reaction is reasonable in a given situation. Many times people with RSD grew up as people pleasers to avoid conflict or disapproval, and they may strive for perfection to compensate for a fear of failure that could lead to exclusion and judgments. They're struggling to let go of past hurts, which might keep them from reaching out socially, managing conflict directly, and just feeling good enough being on the planet. It's hard for them to believe that they're worth loving because they exist. And I say they here because it might be you, or you might be here for your partner, so I don't want to make any assumptions. It's important to know that people with RSD not only believe their core false beliefs about deficiency, that they're true, but they also become quickly overwhelmed by tidal waves of intense anger, hurt, or shame that can result in lashing out at others or simply withdrawing, hiding, and licking their wounds, hoping it doesn't happen again. Now, how does RSD increase conflict in couples? So most couples perceive conflict as threatening to the security of their relationship, of the attachment that they have to each other in the relationship. And differentiation is an ability to separate yourself from your partner while being connected and to regulate yourself. And this is super challenging for many people with RSD. It's very difficult to hold on to themselves in the presence of their partner's distress. And likewise, if you are someone who is partnered to someone who has ADHD, it's difficult for you to hold on to yourself in the presence of their distress, perhaps because you feel pressure to join with them when you're actually angry with them, perhaps because you want to be supportive, but you're very angry and triggered yourself and you need to regulate yourself. So this idea of differentiation and autonomy within a relationship is actually the definition of a mature adult attachment. I can hold on to myself while you're in distress, and I can empathize with your distress, but I don't have to take it on and I don't have to act it out. And this is where we ultimately want to go, not just for couples living with ADHD, but for all couples. John Gottman and his associates have done a lot of research on couples, and there are themes, patterns that he has identified in couples who are struggling. And these concepts are called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these patterns develop because of intense criticism, blame, resentment, and defensiveness. So I want to go through these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which Dr. Gottman has found are the most destructive to relationships, especially as indicated in his research by a subsequent divorce. And they appear to cover a varieties of attack, criticism and contempt, and defense, defensiveness and stonewalling. So criticism is an attack on a person's character, not for something they've done, but who they are. And it's separate from a complaint about behavior. This is, when you are attacking who someone is, and usually involves a certain type of name calling. Defensiveness takes the form of claiming oneself blameless and a victim of the other person's attack. It often involves deflecting blame back onto the partner rather than being able to be accountable for your part in any disagreement or situation. Contempt is behavior that is disrespectful, and it includes sarcastic mocking, name calling, and eye rolling. Stonewalling, the last horseman, is withdrawal from the interaction, an emotional avoidance strategy. It's expressed by non-responsiveness to a partner, avoiding eye contact, acting busy, or engaging in other distracting behaviors. Common patterns result from, so we have these four horsemen that are really sort of at the base of conflict in couples. But we also see patterns in how couples relate to each other. So we see a pursue withdrawal pattern. We see a dominance passivity pattern. We see negativity and an avoidance of anger, often called passive aggression. We see patterns of emoting for two. And often this is the rejection sensitive partner who has big feelings and is carrying feelings for the other person that the other person might have unconsciously dumped into their yard, or as I like to say, it's an import-export business. We see this with teenagers as well, and money and power. So these are all patterns where couples are, we see in couples: pursue, withdraw, dominance, passivity, negativity, passive aggression, emoting for two, money and power. And I thought about this famous saying, whoever has the gold makes the rules. And so this is another issue in couples, instead of earning for the partnership and the family, there's a sense of earning, and it is supporting the partnership and the family, but that as the earner, you're entitled to certain privileges that the other people are not. When preparing for this presentation, I was thinking a lot about couples living with ADHD. And I realized that although I'm not John Gottman at all, I want to name a fifth horseman of the apocalypse for couples with ADHD. And that horseman is inequity. So to live successfully in any partnership relationship means forgetting about fairness. Focusing on equality can lead couples down a very rocky path. It may seem in your relationship that one person does more of the heavy lifting. But my question to you is, what is each person offering? How can you as a couple lean into the strengths of each other and have chores and roles and responsibilities that play into your strengths? And when there are activities that you both struggle with, that you figure out how to do them together, that there's an alliance. So a healthy relationship is all about give and take, effective communication, and acceptance of the other person's strengths and their limitations. In partnerships, people have different skill sets. One person can be the organizer and the motivator, and the other person may be better at following lists, coming up with fun ideas, or recalling specific memories from 5 years ago. Instead of concentrating on fairness, I encourage you to shift your attention to what will help nurture your relationship, that third entity, that crucible of love and attraction, friendship and partnership, to foster closeness and to be useful in getting things done. We have to kill the reminder robot. And I know that's kind of aggressive language, but a reminder robot is a partner who is constantly on the case of the other person about what they should be doing. This is not effective, and it causes a lot of harm and brings out the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Instead, you want to make collaborative agreements with accountability plans, then lean into each other's strengths, and create, and then lay out routines for living and being with each other. Routines precede habits. And for a lot of people with ADHD, creating a routine, like they'll have an idea of what the routine, you may have an idea of what the routine looks like, but then actually following through on the routine is where you get tripped up. How can your partnership assist you with that? What cues do you need that are neutral and don't come from your partner? So this means breaking down tasks into manageable parts, delegating chores based on interest and capability. Instead of fairness being your goal, aim for effectiveness and equanimity. For example, I'm better at social planning, cooking, dealing with medical issues, reserving places to stay on vacations, and making sure we celebrate holidays, birthdays, and our anniversary. My husband takes care of the garden, goes to the dump, manages all the structural house problems, deals with the bills, and deals with airlines. Together, we take turns with the laundry, grocery shopping, and walking the dog. Yes, this is kind of gendered, and I'm a bit embarrassed to say it, but this is what works for us. And it has worked for 34 years. So I think it's going to continue in this way. What are the tasks that you need to do as a couple? Write them down. Don't expect a partner with ADHD to remember something you stated or discussed if it's not written on a phone or on a calendar, on a piece of paper with an alert and a notification and an alarm. When your partner with ADHD follows through on something, we want to acknowledge that. We want to help them feel good about being noticed for what they're doing. So do you make joint lists and assign the tasks so one person isn't doing everything? Zoom out and think about the big picture, because what you have in your relationship is an emotional bank account that you're constantly making deposits into and withdrawals. Arguments are the withdrawals. Not showing up, not being accountable, those are the withdrawals. How are we going to make deposits? I'm trying to go to the next slide. Can you do that, please, for me? Okay. So reduce conflict and manage rejection sensitive dysphoria. So we're going to manage big feelings by slowing things down, because lightning strikes super fast in relationships with ADHD. These escalations, these amygdala takeovers can happen so fast due to challenges with emotional regulation, verbal impulse control, etc. And significant emotional damage can ensue for both parties, transforming tender love into toxic rage. Slow things down and have a pre-arranged list of soothers. Think Q-tip. Why quit taking it personally? You know, is this about you? Are they making something about you that doesn't feel about you? Really listen to your gut around this. Ask yourself, if you're lecturing or yelling, why am I talking now? Or if you're interrupting, instead of attentively listening to what your partner's saying. Institute a take back of the day for your couple and for your family. I said this thing, I regret it, I'd like it to be my take back. And if someone says that, then we as the receiver need to figure out how to forgive them, because they're asking for forgiveness. We as a partner cannot say, I hope this is going to be your take back today. No, it doesn't work that way. You can express that you're sad, but you can't tell someone when to take something back. One thing that I find it does not happen enough in couples is giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Instead of assuming that your partner is doing something harmful, painful, inappropriate, irresponsible on purpose, why not ask some questions with love in your heart? I'm curious about, I wonder, it's confusing to me. I was surprised. It hurt. Try to shift never and always out of your vocabulary. Most of the time and often are way better than always and never, because always and never are absolutes that actually are just not true. Next slide, please. So we're going to use my 5 C's approach with couples. We're going to practice self-control by identifying what triggers us individually, making a note of that. We're going to practice compassion because we're going to pick one behavior to work on for ourselves and one that we would like them to work on. People can really only change one thing at a time. My husband will say, I want you to turn off the light in the garage when you come in. I would like you to, put your briefcase in your cubby, not on the counter. And by the way, can you please stop interrupting me so much when I'm trying to, express something or tell a story or whatever. He is a long talker and I love him dearly, but he's a long talker, so I interrupt. So I said, okay, you can have one thing. And he's like, oh, I'll take the interrupting. And I'm like, that's the hardest thing. And he smiled. It's the hardest thing. And he's right. And that's something that I want to do as well. So this is behaviors that I'll go into how you're going to pick this. Collaboration, you're working together on a plan for whatever you need to get done or how you want to change something in your relationship. Consistency, not perfection, steadiness. Steadiness, consistent efforts. We're looking for efforting, and then we're going to celebrate that efforting by noticing any progress that occurs. So let's look at my reverse steps method. STEPS, that's the acronym. Self-control. When the intensity of a conversation rises, pay attention to your bodily signals that indicate that you're becoming activated, okay? So maybe your heart starts beating faster, or you begin perspiring, or you're speaking louder. If you can catch your dysregulation early, you can avoid a massive eruption. So practice your self-awareness and paying attention to your body sensations when you're not activated so that you can pay attention more neutrally when you are. We want to use words to engage our frontal lobes and our executive functioning skills, such as these phrases I've listed here. So we're practicing our reverse steps. We're putting ourselves in reverse because we're zooming out, we're separating, we're cooling down, and then we're going to move forward. It's a 5-step plan. Step 2, plan for some time apart. Those tricky moments, instead of pretending that your conflicts are going to magically disappear, and once you have a fight, it's not going to come back. Remember that people have the same fight over and over, and be honest. Acknowledge that, yes, you're probably going to disagree again. So what's our plan going to be? We need a time apart plan. And this is what we decide in advance. How much time do we need to separate, to cool down and restabilize? How are we going to call for a break in the escalation? Some couples say giraffe. Some couples just do this. Decide what works for you, what each of you will do during that time. Honestly, what your partner does in that time to soothe themselves and calm down is not really of your concern. It's what you're going to do for yourself to soothe yourself and slow down. And then when and where you're going to come back together. Step 3, during your time apart, reflect on what occurred. Think about what you really are upset about and what you want in this moment, or what conversation you'd like to have about this issue. If you need to vent, grab a pen or your computer and start writing, planning to throw it out later, talk into your phone, just get it out. Maybe with that voice memo, you'll get things off your chest. Maybe draw something, go for a run, break out your yoga mat. Then ask yourself, what could I have done differently or said differently? And how could I express my thoughts or desires in a more effective, empathic way? When you live in a relationship marked by ADHD and rejection-sensitive dysphoria, it's critical that you consider what you're accountable for in any interaction that is sour. We're looking for an evenness here, getting back to baseline. Step 4, practice reflective listening. So this is a great tool that we're going to practice outside of a conflict so that when you're in a conflict, you can use it. And here's what you're going to do. Initially, the way it works is that there's a listener and a talker, okay? The listener has the harder job. And for people with ADHD who may struggle with auditory processing or working memory, it's difficult to listen and reflect back. So it's important that there is a signal that you can use with your partner when you have reached your maximum so that you can move forward. So we're going to practice this outside of having an argument. So when you're having an argument, you can resort to this instead of having the argument. So here's how you're going to practice reflective listening. You're going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Okay. Actually, I'm going to go into the next slide so you can see this. So initially we'll start with 3 minutes per person just to get yourselves to get the skill. And then you're going to build up to 5 minutes per person. And maybe even you'll get to 10. Most of the families, the couples that I work with don't get to 10. So each person gets half of the set time. The speaker starts to talk about what's on their mind. Remember, this is the practice, and then pauses after a sentence or two, or the listener can use a hand signal when their memory capacity is full. Then when there is this pause and the listener has repeated what they've heard, then the listener can say, what I heard you say is X. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? And then the speaker continues. And this back and forth continues until the timer rings. Then you switch roles. You practice this. I aim for initially for the couples I work with twice a week. And you can talk about anything except an issue between you. You can talk about what happened at work, the weather, how your exercise session went. This practice is for something that's not triggering. Then you're going to transition to start to use this when you are noticing that escalation that has emerged on the scene, that there are intense feelings. You'll say, let's go to reflective listening, so that each person can feel heard and each person gets to state what's going on. The fifth step is to strategize. So when you've done the reflective, when you come back together after your time apart, maybe you decide you want to do some reflective listening to process what happened in your disagreement or situation, then it's time to strategize where you're going to go next. You're going to collaborate and know that it's okay if you have different needs, because this is a judgment-free zone. The goal is to proceed with clear minds and open hearts. So what are some key takeaways for couples living with ADHD and RSD? Use I statements and reflective listening. Take a few steps back. Use the reverse steps method. Many couples living with ADHD are so busy dealing with the pressures and responsibilities of daily life that they've lost track of what drew them together in the first place. Nurturing your positive connection is essential for growing your love. Find some time to remember what you like about one another and to have prearranged set dates, at least once a month, ideally once a week. When my kids were in school, my husband and I would meet for lunch on Thursdays. That was our time. The kids were in school. We didn't have to worry about childcare. That's when we got together, and we would check in and talk about things that needed to happen for the family, but also about how we were doing. We want to keep a growth mindset, an open mindset. We're going to try something. We're going to see what happens. If it doesn't work, we'll come back together. We'll pivot and we'll try something else. Set small goals to aim for change at a time. Remember that yes starts the process of change and yet keeps it going, and that the learning process happens over time. Increase your compassion for yourself and for your partner, remembering that everybody's doing the best they can with the tools they have available to them at any given moment. So we're seeing mistakes as learning opportunities. We're acknowledging vulnerabilities as areas of improvement. And we're focusing on noticing effort as much or more than the outcome. And the last thing that I want to encourage you to do is to exchange an appreciation once a day. Just something that your partner did, your person did, that maybe you're grateful for or you liked, or thanks so much for going to the dump. Thanks so much for cooking dinner, or I really liked how you folded my clothes. Something so that they feel seen. It's important to feel seen and heard in a healthy relationship. So this is a free downloadable that I created for you. You can scan it here. I really hope it works. It's on RSD and relationships. So you can take this with you. And it summarizes a lot of what I spoke about today. And now we're going to move on to the other parts of our webinar.
Sharon, thank you so much. And I just want to say that was so chock full of advice and resources. I want to assure everyone listening that you will get a link for the replay for this full webinar. So if you would like to share it with a significant other, rewatch it yourself, that will be coming in an email. Lots of questions about that, people taking notes feverishly. So I will get into what we are calling the Solve My Problem portion of today's event. And we are going to ask a few questions that people submitted in advance. So one ADDitude reader wrote in, I'm in a romantic relationship where both of us have ADHD and RSD. It's difficult for either of us to not take the other's bad mood personally, even when we explain the reason for the bad mood is not, in fact, the other person. His reaction is typically defensive or spiteful, whereas mine is typically to isolate, shame spiral, and possibly harbor some growing resentment. I suppose I'm wondering how to build up resilience against someone else's bad mood when the two of us can't help but feed off of each other's negative energy.
This is a great question. So remember I talked about holding on to yourself in the presence of your partner's dysregulation? To me, that's the solution to this question. You know, your partner can do whatever they want, and that's up to them. It's what you choose to take on that they're exporting. So they may be having a tantrum, they may be blaming you, and you can say, I'm not engaging in this behavior. This is not healthy behavior for you. It's not healthy for me. I'm calling a time apart. I'll see you in 2 hours or whatever you've agreed on. But, you know, there, again, it's the sense like you want to feel heard and your partner wants to feel heard. You want to feel seen and your partner wants to feel seen. So then we want to do reflective listening. We want to have conversations that may feel forced with that model, but that model will assist you in moving past the stuck place. So the first is holding on to yourself in the presence of your partner's issues. And the second is learning how to have conversations about difficult things with reflective listening.
Okay, wonderful advice. And the next question is, when someone ends a relationship with me, it tends to knock me out of commission. It puts me in an isolating depression for months. How can I reduce that time? I feel like I'm about to completely give up on the idea of ever being in a romantic relationship ever again because I'll never feel ready.
I want to give you a hug. You know, rejection is painful. And particularly when you've opened yourself up in a relationship, you've shared your vulnerabilities, and then things don't work out. But I really want to encourage you to think about the 50-50 perspective. So in a relationship, you are contributing 50% and your partner is contributing 50%. And so your partner is doing things that they are bringing to the relationship from their own history, from their own genetics, from their environment in which they were raised, and you're doing the same. And sometimes those meet and match. Sometimes those meet and you're in a relationship and it's working, but those things rub up against each other. I think the important thing is for you to really take a look at what you did that really contributed to the sort of ongoing length of the relationship as assets, rather than focus on the rejection that you've experienced. One of the challenges with rejection sensitive dysphoria is to be able to pivot your attention away from the ogre's focus on I'm worthless, I'm not worth loving, I can't get it right. That is just a whole bunch of negativity that you've absorbed that you're now telling yourself because you're trying to protect yourself from more pain later on. And the thing is, life is, as the Buddha said, suffering. There is pain, there is great joy. So we will stumble and we will have to pick ourselves up. And so I would encourage you to focus on what you love to do, things that bring you joy, people you enjoy being around, to start filling up your cup again about what makes you special and unique and worthy of being in an intimate relationship.
Very nice. Okay. And this last question in this segment, I think echoes a lot of what I'm seeing in the live chat as well. As the non-ADHD partner, my concerns never get addressed. Everything I bring up is viewed as criticism or an attack, and it's met with strong emotions and reactions. I feel so stuck and unheard, like I'm walking on eggshells all the time. Even the wrong look from me can elicit this reaction. What can I do?
So such a great question. One of my colleagues said that that she had a client who was a non-ADHD partner, and gave this analogy. Imagine that you're in a canoe and you're paddling, and you're with your partner and your kids, and they're paddling. Only you're the only person who's actually paddling forward in an attempt to get to the other side of the lake. They're slapping the water, they're doing circles, and you're just trying to get to the other side of the lake. And so there can be a lot of frustration for partners of people with ADHD. And so that frustration may come out in ways that you're not intending, or ways that you may not be aware of. And so the first thing that I think is important is to clean your side of the street, and make sure that if you have feedback, that it is neutral. I also would really encourage you to think about what area of in the couple is something that you'd most like to work on your end and on their end, because people really can be very sensitive and reactive when they feel like there's a list of things they need to do differently. You're mentioning that sometimes perceived looks are seen as critical, that there's sort of an oversensitivity to criticism. This happens a lot for people with ADHD. And I think this is where the benefit of the doubt is so important. It's important for the person with RSD or with ADHD to sort of neutrally ask, I noticed that you looked at me. Was there anything behind that look? Because I'm prone to interpreting that look as a judgment and a criticism of me, and I'm wondering what the thinking is behind it. To ask questions that are not blaming questions, but questions of curiosity. And that would go for you too, to ask questions of curiosity. I notice when I'm telling you something that the reaction that you have is, anger and, defensiveness. How could I say it in a way that would be easier for you to hear?
Okay. So I do want to quickly thank our sponsor, Play Attention, before we head into the Q&A. I have so many great questions stacked up here. I'm going to start with the results from the quick survey that we asked at the beginning of today's webinar, because I think it helps to set the stage for the Q&A section here in the last few minutes. We asked about what specifically people with RSD, what tends to trigger their rejection sensitive dysphoria in relationships. And not surprisingly, the number one answer was feeling criticized or judged. Interestingly, perceived abandonment or rejection was the third. Feeling underappreciated or unvalued, and noting or sensing their partner's frustration or disappointment. I thought that was an important one to bring up. On the flip side, our non-ADHD partners told us that their biggest struggles were they felt that they had to avoid sharing their thoughts and feelings for fear that their partner would react poorly. They said that they found it hard to balance expressing their own feelings and supporting their partner. And they find themselves becoming defensive, which often worsens the reaction. So these are themes that we very much see in the questions coming in today. So I want to back up for one quick second, because we're getting a lot of questions, people wondering, is RSD exclusive to ADHD?
No, Dr. Dodson does not believe so, and neither do I, and that's not what the research shows. It's just, it happens more often for people with ADHD, and I would dare say people who are neurodivergent, who have experienced a great deal of negativity towards them for being different, for being an outside the box thinker. And I think there can be a genetic susceptibility as well to anxiety and depression, which can contribute to or exacerbate RSD.
Okay, very helpful. Because we have a lot of people, as we know, ADHD does not often travel alone. There are a lot of other conditions in the works influencing everything. So I think it's useful to have that frame. So I'm going to start out with what I think is a common question from someone listening who, she said both she and her husband have ADHD, but his RSD is significant. And she feels she has to hold back she has to hold all of the emotional and household burdens. And she feels that she can't tell him when she needs help without him feeling criticized. And this is something we're hearing from both spouses, you know, with ADHD and without. They need a way to enter those conversations. So that they can feel that, yeah, there's not that inequity that you spoke about.
So this is interesting because what we're talking about is having anxiety about asking for help, right? Because you're concerned about the reaction that you're going to get from your partner. And so my advice would be to sit down, have a conversation together. How do we want to ask each other for help and support? Because the way we're doing it is not working. I firmly believe that we always want to do more of what works in life. And if people are afraid to ask their partners for help, then that's a signal that something is off in the relationship. And again, our job is to kind of figure out how to nurture and hold the crucible of their love and connection. And so what would it look like to ask for help in a way that is comfortable for the asker and is comfortable for the receiver as well? So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is this idea of burden. Burden is just not a helpful thing to carry around in a relationship. We each contribute things. Some people feel like they do more work, and they might do more work than other people. But what are we each contributing, and how can we feel like that actually fits together to create a flourishing whole, WHOLE? instead of a drain that you're always doing this and I'm always doing this. Being afraid to ask your partner for something, to me, is a red flag of one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. And so if you're afraid to ask for something, then that's a signal that you and your partner are not connecting as equals in the relationship. How can you build a relationship where there is more equality paid to what you're actually doing? So I said you don't want to think about equality. I agree. You don't want to. But if you feel burdened, then that issue is already how you're framing things. So we're not going to be able to throw that out yet until you can each acknowledge that people are contributing different things. The reality is that in some relationships, some people, they are skewed, and there needs to be an adjustment. And that, I think, are conversations that if you cannot have on your own as a couple, then I encourage you strongly to find a couples therapist.
Right. And the advice that you gave, and yes, the slides will be available for those who are asking about using those I statements, using the reflective listening, those tools. Yes. Yeah, are very helpful. A lot of people asking in the moment, both sides of this coin. In the moment, your significant other is upset, is experiencing RSD based on an interaction. How can you, what can you do? If you walk away, it could make it worse. It could worsen those feelings.
You can't walk away. What you can do is say, what I'm noticing is that you're activated, you're triggered, you're upset. We've talked about a plan, the STEPS program, the STEPS method. Would you like us to take some time apart? Would that help you re-regulate? Would that help you settle? Or is there something that you would like us to do together that would help? Because for some people, taking the time apart is useful. And for other people, when they feel that way, what they really want is a hug. What they really want is to be told, I love you. We'll get through this together. So it depends, right? Because I think the problem is the mind reading component. Like, you cannot read the mind of your partner, nor can your partner read your mind. So that means that we want to ask questions in a neutral way that we've agreed to in this moment. What can I do that would assist you in slowing things down, in managing your feelings? Or what would you like to do that will assist you? And then when can we come back together? It's really important that you plan for these moments in advance. Otherwise, without the plan, you can't actually know what you're going to do.
Okay, very helpful. This is related, but a number of people who have experienced RSD and wondering about advice for stopping the perseveration. The holding of the grudge, the inability to let things go. They want to be able to do this, and they just don't feel like they have the tool set.
I so understand this, experiencing this myself at times. I think the thing is, like, when I notice that this old story's coming up, or these old feelings, I'm aware that my ogre is trying to protect me from something. It's shown up because I'm activated in some way that I may not even be aware of. And so really what I have to do is to comfort my ogre, to talk back to that part of myself and say, you know what, when that person left you on the curb while you were crying after breaking up with you, that was a terrible, rotten thing. It hurt, and it still hurts when you think about it. Give yourself a hug, because look how much further we've come. To be able to reassure yourself in some way. And then to say, what can I focus on instead of that? What can I shift my attention to? This takes quite a bit of regulation and practice. And so you might have a go-to, like I have I have what I call a happy playlist. It's not all happy songs, but there's songs that when I listen to, they sort of shift my mood. Or I might, do some knitting, or I'll go lie down on the rug and be with my dog. Something that can help me shift away from that ruminative thought. So I comfort myself, I validate myself, and then I pivot.
Very helpful.
Also,
Dr.
I want to
Saline,
say that this is not just about me, but that I've taught my clients to do this too, and they find this very useful. Sometimes they like to just close their eyes and imagine themselves at their favorite place, a beach, a mountain, a restaurant, and to just take a few breaths in that place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some people saying it helps for them to just purge it a little bit, a journal, some
Yes.
kind of place to put down the thoughts, leave them there, and move forwards. So
absolutely. A journal is always great. Writing, drawing, talking it into your phone, making a voice memo. Here I am. This thing has come up again, blah, blah, blah. And then it's out. It's gone.
Right. Dr. Saline, I think that we could talk about this for 3 more hours, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. Thank you so much for this incredibly insightful and useful webinar for the ADDitude community.
Thank you so much for having me, Annie. It's my great pleasure. And I want to remind people that in the session notes is the QR code for the downloadable. And I am so grateful to being with you today. I appreciate your attention, and I look forward to connecting more in the future.
Wonderful. And those of you who are listening, please know that all of the event resources will be available after the event. If you go to ADDitudemag.com and search for podcast 524, you will find the slides, and recording are posted in just a few hours. If you're listening in replay mode, you will just simply click on the episode description to get all those goodies. And please know that our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Expert Podcast, and it is available on most streaming platforms. We hope you will join us next week. Our free webinar is on talking with your doctor about ADHD and menopause. You do not want to miss that one. If you want to make sure you get all the details, just visit us at additudemag.com/newsletters, and you can sign up for all the alerts that you need. So for now, again, thank you, Dr. Saline, and thank you everyone who joined us for this conversation. We hope to see you again soon.